Welcome to my 10th video on my Making Browser Games series, and today I'm going to be talking about CSS code and actually stylizing your web page. So we made some advances in the last video. We actually have some content on the web page itself, and it's not just the entire game being held or being run from this console here. So what I want to mention here now, what I want to teach, is how to stylize the web page, and in particular, we're going to change the colors, change the font, and change the size. And we're going to do all that with CSS code. Because remember, HTML is the skeleton of the program, JavaScript is the brains, CSS is the styling of your website. And I think I said program a second ago, I mean website. CSS is how you stylize it. So first, let's start with this. How do we change the color of our header tag up here? Well, we're going to use CSS code for that, but I haven't taught you any. If you want to change the color of this H1 or this header tag here, what you can do is inside the opening tag, and when I say inside, I mean in between these angle brackets. Inside the opening tag, I can just type style equals followed by 2 quotation marks. And anything I put in these quotation marks is going to be my CSS code. So make a note of that. I think this is still style equals. I think it's just an attribute of this HTML element, but what goes inside these quotes is going to be CSS code. So here's our first CSS code. If we want this color to be red, then I can type color colon red. And then I'm going to end it with a semicolon. CSS code, everything in these quotation marks, CSS is very similar to JavaScript in that it requires a semicolon at the end of almost all its lines of code. So our first CSS code is going to be color colon red, followed by a semicolon. And when I refresh the page, in fact, this up here is now the color red. And you can try out several different colors, blue, refresh the page, you get blue. You can try cyan as well, like that. And then if you don't know the particular word for the color you want, you can always just put RGB, 2 parentheses, and inside of these 2 parentheses, you'll just put a color code, which is going to be on the scale of 0 to 255. If you don't really know what the RGB color code is, this is probably going to be completely useless to you. You're totally fine with just typing green or something like that. But RGB, red, green, blue, you're going to put 3 numbers in here that correspond to the color codes. And I really don't want to go much more in depth than that, but if I want a magenta, I can put 255 full red, 0 for no green, and 255 full blue. And when I refresh that, I do in fact get a magenta header here. So if you already know what an RGB color code is, then you can go ahead and use this. Otherwise, you can just use, I think I could just type magenta like that, and it works just the same. So whichever one of those methods that you prefer. And you can do the same thing with the paragraph tag. I can type style equals, and then inside of here, I'll put my CSS color, and I'll put blue, like that. When I save it, I get magenta text here, blue text down here. And we're getting much better results with this. Now, let's say I wanted, this web page is still mostly empty, so let's say I wanted this, and let's say I wanted all this text to be bigger. Well, I can use CSS to make the text bigger. I'm going to add another CSS rule, which, by the way, what we just typed, color magenta, color blue, those are rules. They are rules for how your web browser is going to render the web page. And more specifically, this was just the color rule. Well, here's another rule. You can change the font dash size. And this rule that we're typing, this new CSS rule, has a lot of the same rules as the previous one. You just type the name of the attribute you're changing, followed by a colon, followed by the value. So font size is the attribute. We have a colon. Now here's the value. For a font size, let's say this header, I want the size in pixels to be 50 pixels. you type px for pixels, and you end with a semicolon. I'm going to save that, and now our magenta header is much bigger than it was before. So let's add the same thing to the paragraph. Here's my color rule. I'm going to add the font size, colon, and I'm going to add 25 pixels, like that. And now we have a lot bigger text on our page, just like that. Now, a note about the semicolons. You could technically omit the semicolon at the end here, and omit the semicolon at the end here. So like the very last rule inside of your element, and if I run this, I get the exact same result. You could get away with that, and the reason being, once you finish up your CSS code and there's nothing else for the browser to think of, then you don't really need a semicolon, but you could not do the same thing with the semicolons in between our two rules here. So this semicolon, if I delete this and I delete this, we still have the semicolons at the end, but not the ones in the middle. When I run that, it doesn't look like really any of that CSS is working anymore. The web browser needs the semicolons in order to separate these CSS rules. And I just, by virtue, add the one at the end. So that's my note on the semicolons. Let me show one other CSS property, and that's going to be the font family, or basically just the font. So let's say that I want these to be different fonts, which would look kind of cool. Big text in a different font from the small text. Well, I can add another CSS rule, still in between these two quotation marks, and this rule is going to be font-family. And the value, I wish it was just font. I wish I could just do font like that, but it is font family. The value, you just type in the name of the font, so I can type in Helvetica, like that, followed by a semicolon. And when I run this, we get the Helvetica font up here, and then a different font down here. Whatever the browser default font is for Microsoft Edge, that's what it's using here. Not really sure what it is. And I can do the same thing for the paragraph down here. I'm going to set the font family to be Times, something like that. I'll do Times, which it looks like that didn't make any difference, so it's quite possible that the browser default is Times. I also don't think it matters if these are capital letters. I'm going to change them both to lowercase, see if that makes a difference. And it doesn't really make a difference there. Let me try one other font. I'm going to type in sans serif for the paragraph tag. And when I run it, I get the sans serif font like that. And now that's all I have to show for CSS rules. You learned 3 different CSS rules, and we typed them all out here. Well, I shouldn't really call color a rule, font size a rule, font family a rule. Those are attributes, they're not rules, but together, color magenta, that is a rule. Font size 50 pixels, that is a rule. Font family Helvetica, that is a rule. So those are 3 CSS rules, and like I mentioned, in the future, we're going to be eventually separating all our code into different files because we have a mix here. JavaScript code is in the script tag, CSS code is inside the HTML opening tags, and HTML is just all over the place. In the future, we're going to learn how to separate all 3 of these programming languages out into different files, but for now, I want to show you this because this is totally fine for when you have a small project like this. One final note before I conclude the video, it does not, when you're specifying a style, make sure you only do it for the opening HTML tag. So notice my H1, my closing H1 tag back here does not have the same, if I could actually zoom in over there, does not have the same style equals. And you can tell by this weird highlighting, it doesn't even want me to type anything there. So you only put your CSS rules in the opening one.